The God of War games have always been great, but in the past few years, the two newest additions to the franchise have become something more. They've become cinematic masterpieces to rival those we see in movie theaters.
Are you not entertained? Are you not entertained?
They've become triumphs of storytelling that inspire visceral emotion in players. They've become easily recognizable to a mainstream audience as art. But in doing so, they have the whole industry asking one question: how does this turn into this? The original God of War is a combo-centric hack-and-slash game with an emphasis on action set pieces, awesome weapons, and a whole lot of blood. Just so much blood.
Entire armies fell before Kratos.
Developed by Sony's Santa Monica studio and released in March of 2005, the game immediately became a critically acclaimed sales juggernaut. The main character, Kratos, was quickly cemented as a sort of mascot for PlayStation due to the success. And its two sequels, 2007's God of War 2 and 2013's God of War 3, were similarly adored. Each new installment in the main series improved on the satisfying combat, solid story, cinematic boss fights, unique use of QTEs, and top-of-the-line graphics that had been so highly praised in the first game. If you've been paying attention to the God of War series in the last few years, you'll probably notice that much of that early praise still applies to both the 2018 God of War and the recently released God of War Ragnarok. So if critics are still saying the same thing about the series almost 2 decades later, your average person may assume that the games haven't changed that much. But your average person would be very wrong. The original God of War was created because the developers wanted to
rip Medusa's head off and turn people to stone, and I wanted to fight Cyclopses.
By their own admission, they were creating a game that they would have wanted to play as children, which does make some of the more M-rated QTE sequences a little weird in hindsight, but it makes sense because 2005's God of War is a perfect example of a power fantasy in its purest and most entertaining form. Kratos is an ultra-powerful warrior, with a seemingly endless well of creative ways to rack up hits and kill, well, the entire Greek pantheon.
Our hero has arrived. Applause for another bastard child of Zeus.
His story of revenge and redemption, while not exactly revolutionary, is perfectly tailored to keep players invested without feeling bogged down by narrative in a combat and puzzle-heavy game. The pulled-back view and often arcadey camera angles encouraged a focus on the scope of battle rather than the character himself, and expertly crafted cutscenes were peppered in only when necessary for the plot or to showcase something particularly awesome. This worked for the gaming public in 2005 as well as it did in 2013, which is why the first 3 God of War games are also similar to one another. While gaming culture at the time may have been in flux as at-home consoles and gaming PCs boomed in popularity, the tried and true method of combining brutal weapons-based combat with memorable boss battles and very little in the way of plot was still profitable. Even still, the God of War games were starting to show their age. The hack-and-slash subgenre was becoming increasingly less common in AAA releases. Their choice in-camera angles looked dated next to the newer third-person action-adventure games coming out in the 2010s. The grand boss stages with a specific order of operations were mostly a thing of the past. And even the character of Kratos himself had started to feel like a mascot of a bygone era, as Sony continued to stockpile more and more iconic characters and franchises. Considering how well the games had sold, a 4th installment in the main series was practically a given. And yet, Sony and Santa Monica clearly understood that something needed to change. In a brilliant and likely extremely difficult move, they decided to make that change while they were still riding high, rather than waiting until the series had its first major failure. This would be a bold move for any franchise, but it was especially bold for a gaming cultural touchstone like God of War. Sticking to what is safe and known is always easier. If Santa Monica had taken God of War in the wrong direction, they could have burned the entire thing to the ground.
Burn this village! Burn it to the ground!
On the other hand, staying stagnant runs the risk of becoming boring and unoriginal. Whatever Santa Monica Studios did, it had to be perfect. Thankfully, it was. Directed by longtime series developer Cory Barlog and written by the newly appointed Matt Sophos, the game had an ideal balance of fresh faces and seasoned players to bring God of War into a new age. Now, not everyone loves the 2018 reinvention of the God of War series, but it's safe to say that a lot of people do. It earned the title of not only the best-selling game in the series, but also the best-selling PS4 game ever released at the time. Listing every single one of its awards and nominations would double the runtime of this video, and it's not hard to see why. If 2005's God of War was the developers making a game they wanted to play as children, 2018's God of War seemed to be the developers making a game they wanted to play as adults. 13 years later, the franchise had grown with its fan base. That was obvious right from the box art as the newly bearded Kratos appeared front and center, but there was more to the series' evolution than just a facelift for its main character. The entire game is startling in its beauty. It pushed the PS4 hardware to its absolute limits just as its predecessors had done with PS2 and 3. But this time with the help of some amazing mocap and voice work.
What is it, boy?
The realism was almost unbelievable. Ditching the pulled back camera, we now stick close to Kratos in what is presented as a completely unbroken single shot for the entire duration of the game. It's almost intimate by comparison, and it aids in the game's ability to tell a compelling story as Kratos fights his way through Norse mythology. But the story is deeper than a revenge plot now.
Wish Mom was here to see it.
Kratos and his son Atreus explore grief, generational trauma, and the difficulties that often come with familial bonds. It's a deeply personal story that narrative designer Matt Sophos clearly took care in bringing to life in a realistic way, just as the rest of the devs took care in making sure that this new God of War game was still at least somewhat recognizable to longtime fans. There are some surface level elements that are brought over from the past titles, as well as a handful of QTEs. There are puzzles galore, and the fights still certainly pack a punch, but they're intended to be much more cinematic than ever before. It's no longer about racking up hits. Rather, it's about the immersive look and feel of combat. Boss battles stretch on for minutes at a time, often with little to no player interactivity, where the first 3 games were fixed on keeping players actively engaged at all times. This all adds to the reinvention of the series. While it's still undeniably a God of War game, the developers worked hard to make it more appealing to modern gaming audiences. They definitely achieved that goal, and strive to do it again for yet another new installment in the series, 2022's God of War Ragnarok. Once more, history was made as Ragnarok became the fastest-selling game in the series, as well as the best-selling Sony game ever put on a PlayStation console. As has become a pattern for God of War, Ragnarok pushed the graphical limitations of the PS4 and 5 as far as they would go. Otherwise, it gave us a lot of the same sort of thing players had come to expect. Boss battles still feel like grand adventures, puzzles are fun to figure out, QTEs pop up from time to time, and there's a heavy focus on the relationship between Kratos and his son, along with their little found family.
You know what? I'm gonna build a bigger table.
We also get what might be the most concrete redemption of Kratos' character. We won't spoil it for you here today, but you should go and play it for yourself if you haven't, because it is truly incredible. That's really what differentiates this new era of God of War from the original games. This deeply immersive and heartfelt story plays out through the closer camera, cinematic combat, incredible voice and mocap performances, and of course the writing itself. That culminates in a more thoughtful and mature experience for a more thoughtful and mature audience. And that's not meant to disparage the bloody, hilarious, and vulgar origins of the series. It just means that Ragnarok, like every other God of War game to come before it, was obviously made with a level of love, dedication, and passion that only Santa Monica Studios can replicate. After all this time, the continued stellar quality of the God of War series is just an assertion of the talent of the developers and their understanding of both their craft and the industry at large. Because while God of War has been loved for most of the same reasons since its inception, it only managed such a feat because the franchise adapted to a changing gaming landscape. As narrative designer Matt Sophos once said, people reinvent themselves all the time. That's kind of a part of being human, even if you're like Kratos and you're only part human. And that is all for today's video. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. Remember to like this video and subscribe to Nerdstalgic Gaming for more videos just like this. And in the meantime, let us know down below, which God of War game is your favorite?